Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis for today. Let's begin with the first article that is based on the recent Supreme Court judgment on the PMLA. PMLA here stands for the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Now, just to give you a brief background of why this article has been written and what did the Supreme Court do. I'm sure all of you are aware by now that the ED, Enforcement Directorate, which has been in the news all across the country now, gets its powers from the PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So, if a person is involved in money laundering, if the person is misusing the illegally obtained money, then he or she will be charged under the PMLA and the Enforcement Directorate will come in and take action. Now, what has happened is over the past few years, the powers of the ED, Enforcement Directorate, have increased drastically. And many people have gone to the court saying that this should not be allowed. PMLA is a draconian law. ED should not have so much power, so on and so forth. And the expectation was that yes, the Supreme Court will agree to it. But the surprising part was the Supreme Court upheld all the powers given to the ED and the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So much so that the Supreme Court had said that in this particular act, bail will be very, very difficult. If the government's lawyer disagrees, then the judge will only give the bail if he is certain that the person will not commit a crime when he is outside. That means even getting a bail has become very, very difficult. Now, this author here who is expressing his point of view about what the Supreme Court has said, that is increasing the powers of ED and upholding the provisions of PMLA, the author here is actually against the Supreme Court judgment. The author here is saying that with all due respect to the Supreme Court, I do not think that the Supreme Court is correct in upholding all the provisions of the PMLA, and we will discuss how. However, before I go here, I just wanted to explain what do you mean by money laundering and how does it come into picture. Now understand this by a very simple example. Let's assume there's a person who has robbed a bank and out of that bank the person has taken out 1 crore rupees cash. Now if I take this cash and if I just keep it in my house and do nothing else, then it is not money laundering. Then ED will not be involved. Then this is a case of theft. The police will come, they will investigate the case, and that is what will happen. However, when this 1 crore rupee that was obtained illegally is misused or it is now used to buy something, that now becomes money laundering. So, for money laundering to happen, you have to use the illegally obtained money to buy something else or for some property or something else. In effect, in simple terms, for a money laundering case to be involved or for PMLA to be involved, there has to be a prior crime. Meaning that the first crime will be that you steal the money. Second crime will be laundering that money. So in any money laundering offense, there is a first crime that is involved that is called predicate offense. Now the problem here as per the author is with this. The predicate offense is very simple. Stealing money, obtaining money illegally from someone. These kind of offenses are very, very old. So these are investigated by the authorities under any common law. Like under these charges, you get bail also under these charges, the punishment is not very high, etc. But when that money is used for laundering, then it all of a sudden becomes a very, very serious matter. That is when the PMLA gets involved. This is a contradiction as per the author. That if the same person has stolen the money and then he's misusing the money, then for the first step, you are saying that the bail will be given. You are saying that this is just a normal stealing case. But when the same person uses that money to buy property, then you say, no, no, no. Now bail also will not be given. Now the person can be forced to be a witness against himself also. Then the person can be forced to tell the truth under the oath. So the author says that PMLA Act has many provisions that are in fact going against our own fundamental rights. I'm sure you have read in fundamental rights that we have the right against self-incrimination. You cannot force anyone to be a witness against himself or herself. But the PMLA says that the authorities can force the person to accept the crime. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. Not just this, there have also been questions on ECIR. Now what is ECIR? See, ECIR is very similar to FIR. Just like the police registers an FIR, that is how the Enforcement Directorate also registers their own information report, which is called the ECIR. Now, ECIR here actually stands for Enforcement Case Information Report. So it's like an FIR only. Many people who have been arrested under the PMLA Act have said that we have not even received a copy of ECIR. We don't even know why are we being arrested, etc. The Supreme Court, however, said that the ED is not compelled to give you a copy of ECIR. Even if the ED does not give you a copy of ECIR, even then the ED will have the powers to arrest you. So in short, the Supreme Court, as per the author, has overlooked even the fundamental rights and upheld the powers of the Enforcement Directorate, which is unfair, and this should not be the case. The author here points out certain errors in what the Supreme Court has done. The first error, as per the author here, is that the Supreme Court, while deciding whether the law should be upheld or not, has only taken the decision based on legislative intent, meaning that Supreme Court has only seen that the intent of the Parliament is good. The Parliament wants to stop the problem of money laundering. How they do that, what powers are they giving to ED doesn't matter. So Supreme Court has based its entire verdict on legislative intent. That should not be the case as per the author. Legislative intent can be one of the reasons how the Supreme Court decides a matter, but not the only reason. Second problem that the author here has is that there has been overemphasis on how serious money laundering is. The Supreme Court, in fact, equated money laundering with terrorism. The Supreme Court said that just like under terrorism, getting a bail is difficult, we should have difficult bail conditions for PMLA also. But this is also not really true. In case of PMLA, the maximum punishment that you can get is 10 years. There are so many other crimes where the punishment is much more than 10 years. So to equate money laundering to the most serious offense like terrorism is also not true. It in fact gives the powers to the authorities to misuse the law. Third, yes, the legislative intent of the Parliament is clear, that yes, they want to control money laundering, all that is fine, but the priority as per the author should be given to what the Constitution says. The Constitution puts a limit on what kind of laws can be made by the Parliament. These limits are in the form of fundamental rights. As we discussed, a person cannot be forced to be a witness against himself. Those things are being overlooked by the provisions of the PMLA, and as per the author, the Supreme Court should have looked into that and not overlooked that. Now, in the past few months, there has been so much talk about the PMLA, that is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, that I am very sure all of you are very aware of most of the provisions of the PMLA. If not, allow me to give you some other details about the PMLA. As I said, the PMLA is mainly to counter money laundering issue in the country. India is not the only country that has this kind of a law. We are a party to Vienna Convention, which is about the global commitment that nations have taken to combat the problem of money laundering. This includes these kind of commitments, that is, the UN Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances, the Basel Statement of Principles, so on and so forth. Do remember, the PMLA is applicable to all the persons, individuals, companies, firms, partnerships firms, corporations, so on and so forth. Recently, the amendments that were introduced in the PMLA are these. Number one, clarification was given about the position of the proceeds of the crime, meaning that what exactly are you misusing? Is it cash? Not just cash, even the property, etc., that has been acquired illegally, and then you misuse it to obtain cash benefit from it, or you misuse it to obtain some other benefit from it, that will also come under money laundering. Also, money laundering has been defined very strictly now. It is not an independent crime, rather dependent on another crime which we just discussed, called the predicate offense. However, the amendment here in the law says that money laundering should be treated as a stand-alone crime and not together with the first crime that is committed, so that state punishment can be given. Third, till the time that the person is earning profit from any illegal commodity, illegal property, etc., till that point of time it will be considered as money laundering only. So you can't say that I bought a house or a building and I just got rent for 1 year, so I should be punished for 1 year. No. Till the time that you keep on getting rent from that illegally occupied territory with illegal money, you would be charged under this offense till that point of time, till the time that you get rid of that property. There have also been many questions on how the ED, that is Enforcement Directorate, has been performing its duty. We have seen how many opposition members across the country have been raided by the ED, arrested by the ED on multiple occasions. One thing that has come into news quite a lot is that although ED has so many powers, the number of people that have been convicted, that is proven guilty under this case, are very, very low. So far, only 23 people, this is data till March of 2022, only 23 people have been convicted by the ED. So the ratio of conviction is very, very dismal, which also supports this argument that this body is being used mainly for political purposes rather than for countering the problem of money laundering. The next article that we want to discuss here is about launching a national tribal health mission. Now, there are two very important things that you need to understand with this article. The first is that it is written on the occasion of International Day of World's Indigenous Peoples. Secondly, the author here talks about a report given to the government in 2018 on how to improve the lives of the tribal community in India. The interesting part is the author himself was the chairman of that committee. And because that committee report has not been implemented so far, through this article, the author also is trying to remind the government that they should go ahead and implement this report. The author here gives certain data about the lives of the tribal in the country. He says that India's 8.6% population comprises of tribals, which is about 11 crore in total. However, the problem is India has the second highest infant mortality rate for tribal people around the world, next only to Pakistan, which is a very, very dismal situation. It was in 2018 that the first national report on the state of India's tribal people's health was submitted to the government. As we said, the chairman of that committee that submitted the 2018 report was the author himself. So he is reminding us of the points that he had written in this report and what did he suggest to the government. He said that number one, as per that report, there are many, many tribals in India, about 5.5 crore, that are living outside the schedule areas. As you have read, under 5th and the 6th schedule, there have been some powers given to the schedule areas. But the tribal population that is not residing in those schedule areas do not really have any rights. Secondly, the health status of the tribal people in India has improved considerably, but there is still a lot of gap that we have to fulfill. For example, the percentage of under 5 mortality in the scheduled tribes is much, much higher as compared to the others. Even child malnutrition, malaria, tuberculosis, all these things are found in much, much higher numbers and proportions amongst the tribal population in India as compared to the others. All of this means that the government of India has to spend much more money on the healthcare facilities of the tribal population, because most of the tribal population is not very financially stable and they don't really go to private hospitals or private doctors. They are mainly dependent on the government healthcare facilities like the public healthcare institutions. And the sad part is they do not have a lot of budget. These institutions don't have adequate infrastructure and they are not able to deal with the problems of health that the tribal community is facing. So the government must ensure that more money is allocated to healthcare infrastructure in these areas. We did have something called a tribal sub-plan. This is an old plan which just said that the union government agrees that states or districts having higher scheduled tribe population should be getting more financial support from the government in proportion to their tribal population. So if a certain district has 20% tribal population and some other district has 15% tribal population, then according to that population, they should be given financial help. That was a tribal sub-plan. But the reality is that almost no state actually implemented this perfectly. And that is why there's still a big gap between the recommendations of the committee and the reality that we see. The committee also suggested certain things. For example, first, the committee suggested we should have a national tribal health action plan. The aim of the plan would be to bring the healthcare standards of the tribals at par with the non-tribals across the states in the country. The committee also suggested that we should focus specifically on those kind of diseases which are found to be very, very common in the tribal population of the country, so that we can actually help them out to tackle these diseases. Allocation of money should be done specifically on the basis of the tribal population as per the national health policy. All these things have already been suggested by the committee in that report, but despite the promises, the government has not accepted or implemented this so far. The author says that the government has been trying to tackle problems such as the sickle cell disease amongst the tribals, but this is just one of the many, many diseases that the tribal population are at risk of. So we cannot just say that tackling one particular disease will solve the entire problem. Now, let me also share with you some of the old initiatives taken by the governments across the country to help the tribal population. At the time of the very first government, it is Jawaharlal Nehru, he advocated something called the Panchsheel for tribal development, meaning that his government actually gave 5 principles for tribal policy. For example, people should develop along the lines of their own genius, so their own values and customs should be respected. The tribal rights in lands and forests should be respected. They should be trained in the work of administration and development. They should not be over administered. They should be given the freedom to plan for their own development, and results should not be judged by statistics or the amount of money spent. The government should not just say that I have spent 1,000 crore rupees in this village and I don't see any infrastructure, so there is no point of spending more money. Because not all the things can be judged as per physical or financial parameters. This is something that the first Prime Minister of India had suggested. It's a kind of a guideline for the future governments. Let me also share with you some of the recent initiatives of the government for tribals in India. As you know, under the renewed Stand Up India scheme, which is launched by SIDBI, scheduled tribe population is given loan on preferential terms to set up their own enterprises. The Union Budget for 2021-22 also reduced the margin money requirement for loans, that is, the amount of money that you have to give yourself from the total amount of loan. The Government of India also has been building many more model residential schools called the Eklavya schools in tribal majority areas for tribal children, for their skill development, vocational training, so on and so forth. These are just some of the many initiatives that the government has been taking for the welfare of the tribal population in the country. The next article that we have here is actually written by the DMK spokesperson. Now, I also advise you, whenever you read any editorial article, especially in any newspaper, before reading the article, do see who is the author, so that you can understand from what point of view this article has been written. For example, if an author is from the BJP, obviously they would take much more efforts to highlight the positive side of the government. On the other hand, when you see articles like these written by those parties who are not in favor of the BJP, obviously those articles will be filled with the criticism of the government. And as a UPSC Civil Services aspirant, you have to get a balanced view of the two. So this is written by the DMK spokesperson, who is actually saying that in the past few years, the central government has been taking away financial powers from the state governments, not allowing the state governments to take their own decisions. And in fact, the center government has been focusing on indirect taxes, which is hurting the economy and it is increasing inflation. He also gives examples of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, how they have been able to curtail inflation as compared to the other states. Now, before we go deeper into this article, just a very quick background. There are two types of taxes: direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are the ones that you directly pay to the government. For example, the income tax, the corporate tax that the companies pay, which they directly pay to the government. Indirect taxes are, for example, GST. When you buy a biscuit, you pay a tax to the company. That company will then give the money to the government on your behalf. So indirect taxes are those which are mainly on commodities that you buy: petrol, diesel, food, so on and so forth. Now, every economist around the world agrees that it is in the best interest of the country that direct taxes should be more, indirect taxes should be less. Why? See, the problem with indirect taxes is that indirect taxes are regressive in nature. What do you mean by regressive? Regressive means they are actually imposed equally on everyone, which is not fair. So if I go to buy a packet of biscuit, if Mukesh Ambani goes to buy a packet of biscuit, and if a very poor person goes to buy a packet of biscuit, all of us are paying the same tax. If I buy petrol, if a very rich person buy petrol, if a very poor person is buying petrol, we are all paying the same tax. This should never be the case. This is the problem with indirect taxes. These are regressive in nature. They harm the poor people much, much more. So all the developed nations have always tried to increase their direct taxes and not the indirect taxes. But the author says that the trend in India is actually the opposite. If you look at how indirect taxes are collected in India, you will see that they are the majority of the earning of the government. Compare that with the OECD nations, some of the most developed nations in the world. For them, their indirect taxes are never more than 33%, while in India they are almost close to 50% now. Poor Indians spend so much money just on fuel and food that they have to pay so much taxes. On the other hand, at the same time, the corporate tax, which has to be imposed on companies, the government has been reducing that. They have reduced that from 35% to 22%. On the other hand, GST on food products, etc., has been increasing. So, author here is saying that this is a flawed economic policy by the government. As a result of which, India is one of the most unequal countries in the entire world, where top 1% of India's richest people hold 22% of India's national income. And all of that has to do with the government's attempt to focus more on indirect taxes rather than direct taxes. He gives an example of how Tamil Nadu and Kerala have been able to perform much better as compared to other states in curtailing inflation. See, when we calculate inflation in India, we mostly focus on food, transportation, fuel, etc. And these are the things where Tamil Nadu and Kerala have worked very well on. Tamil Nadu has a very, very efficient public distribution system through which subsidized food grains are distributed. They also provide free bus rides, for example, for women. All these have ensured that they have actually been able to curtail inflation from the common man. However, the author here actually has a gripe with the central government. He says that states such as Kerala, Tamil Nadu don't get enough money that they deserve. For example, Tamil Nadu gets only 30 paisa in return for every 1 rupee that is contributing to the union government, while states such as UP and Bihar are getting 2 to 3 rupees for every 1 rupee that they are contributing to the government. The union government also has been including charges. The union government also has been increasing cess and surcharges, which are not divided between center and the states. All this is very, very unfair on these states as per the author. And if the finance minister really wants the state governments to be more helpful for the people and wants the state government to curtail inflation, that can only happen if the state governments at least are given certain powers as per the author. Now, because the author here is from the opposition party and has given point of view of the anti-government side, it's my responsibility to share with you certain points from the government side as well. These are some of the initiatives that the government has taken to improve the situation of direct tax collection in India. For example, people who pay income tax now have two options. They can either go with the old regime or the new regime. Those of you who pay income tax would know when you are paying income tax to the government, now you have two options. Either you can file for some deductions like investments and the ATC, etc. For that, you will have a different rate of interest. On the other hand, if you don't have to file for any deductions, then your rate of interest will be different. So there are multiple options that are given. The government also has Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, under which any pending tax disputes are being handled by the government on a priority basis. We also have the expansion of the scope of TDS. TDS means tax deducted at source. So when we get a salary, the company deducts the tax and then they give it to the government directly. So that the government doesn't have to run after every single individual. The company itself deducts the tax and gives it to the government. Also, the government is trying to honor those honest taxpayers that have been paying taxes without any exceptions so that they are encouraged for contributing in the nation's development. Another parameter that you have to understand of how the country's economy actually works is tax to GDP ratio. Now, the higher the tax to GDP ratio, better is the situation of the country, because this tells you how many people are actually paying taxes. As you can see, The developed nations around the world, the richer nations, Denmark, France, Italy, Germany, UK, US, Switzerland, all these are well developed advanced nations that have a higher tax to GDP ratio. The larger the number is, the better it is for them because they are getting more taxes from their people. Do you know what is India's tax to GDP ratio? At present, this is just close to 12% for India. The aim that we have made is that in the next 5 years, we hope to achieve the 20% number, but this will only increase if the number of direct taxpayers improve in India, which is why we have not been able to improve this situation. And that is why the governments across the country always say that they don't have enough money in India. The next article that we have here is about the Supreme Court's directive to actually help an unmarried woman undergo an abortion, although her pregnancy age was above 20 weeks. Now, as you know, in India, we have the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, under which up till 20 weeks, you can have abortion under the advice of one doctor. From 20 to 24 weeks, you can have abortion with the advice of two doctors. After 24 weeks, it will have to be allowed by the judiciary under very, very strict special circumstances. The problem in the law that we have is from 20 to 24 weeks under this time period, when you have to undergo abortion with the advice of at least two medical practitioners, the law only allowed married women to undergo abortion under that and not unmarried women. This specific case was of an unmarried woman in a live-in relationship whose partner had left her after realizing she was pregnant. Since her pregnancy time period or pregnancy age was above 20 weeks, the district court did not allow her to undergo abortion and the case went to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has now taken her side, allowing her to abort the child. And because the Supreme Court does not want every single case to come to them, the Supreme Court is in the process of changing this law and saying that it will be allowed to unmarried women as well. The Supreme Court has said that the law specifically says partner and not husband. So unmarried women who have a partner who is not a husband necessarily should also not be deprived of this particular provision. They should also have the right to get the child aborted between 20 and 24 weeks if two medical practitioners agree. This is a welcome sign because we see what is happening in the American Supreme Court, where they are trying to curtail or take back the women's right over her own body. This is a welcome step in India, where the Supreme Court of India is actually taking the side of unmarried women about autonomy on their body. In the past few weeks, there has been a lot of discussion on the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act in India, that is the MTP. Just in case you missed it, these are the details that I wanted to share with you. In India, abortions have been legal since 1971. However, there have been various changes that have been introduced in this law. Earlier, when the law was first introduced, abortion was allowed but not as a matter of choice. It was only if there are some situations under which it was unfeasible or dangerous. But now it has become a matter of choice. As per the present provisions, abortions will be allowed until 20 weeks on the advice of at least one doctor, then 20 to 24 weeks on advice of two specialist doctors. Women can also terminate their pregnancy if it has been caused due to contraceptive failure, regardless of their marital status. This is also a very, very important point because earlier, before 2021, the law only allowed married women and her husband to do this. Also, even after 24 weeks, only in certain special cases, abortion will be allowed if there is a case of fetal disability and a medical board or specialist doctors say that there will be a problem to the fetus and there will be danger to the life if the child is born. The next article that we have is actually an older article, refurbished once again because of the present situation. This article is written by Mr. Madhav Gadgil. Now you might remember his name. You might remember something called the Gadgil Committee. This was a commission formed by the government a few years back to give a report on how to preserve the Western Ghats in the country. Now, when the report came out, it was a very strict report. Strict in the sense that they said that the entire Western Ghat area should not be disturbed. The government was not allowed to take up any activity in most of that area because it was against the government's interest and against the interest of a lot of companies involved in these areas. That report, that is the Gadgil Commission report, was actually ignored by the government. And soon after that, the government made one more committee called the Kasturi Rangan Committee. They, in their report, allowed the government to take up activities in most parts of the Western Ghats. That is why the Gadgil Commission report was never accepted completely, and Gadgil Commission report chairman, that is Mr. Madhav Gadgil, has been raising his voice ever since. He has written this article on his report only once again. He says that when states such as Kerala face frequent flood like situations, we have to ask a question, why is it happening time and time again? And the answer is not very difficult to get. It is because we have not followed the laws of nature. It is because illegal mining in states such as Goa, etc., has been rampant. We have been ignoring the degradation of human capital in terms of health and employment. Companies have been exploiting the natural resources of the country. For example, there has been rampant overuse of water by cola companies across the country just because they are giving enough money to the government. We have ignored the rights of the local communities for a very, very long time. Mr. Gadgil in this article says that their report had proposed incentives for the local population to conserve the local Western Ghats area, to conserve soil, to conserve forest, but somehow the government just did not accept the report. The committee had suggested that the government should implement 73rd, 74th constitutional amendments properly, not just on paper. Meaning that give more powers to Gram Sabha to decide how their land will be used, to set up biodiversity management committees of the local citizens and let them decide if the land has to be given to a company for mineral exploration or not. Let the local people decide how their land will be used and not someone sitting at the center or the state government decide that. The local body should also be given the power to make suggestions on the sensitivity of their region. All these were just suggestions given by the Gadgil Committee report, which the government did not accept. Mainly because the government found them to be too strict and too against development. And the government wanted to find a balance between the two. That is why the government went ahead and made another committee called the Kasturi Rangan Committee. These are the main comparisons of the two committees. If you can actually see, Gadgil committee said entire Western Ghat is an ecologically sensitive area, while the Kasturi Rangan committee said only 37% of the Western Ghats should be ecologically sensitive area. The Gadgil committee wanted to give the powers to Gram Sabha for decision making, while the Kasturi Rangan committee wanted to give the powers to the government and the bureaucracy, that is the forest officials only. The Gadgil committee said that the entire Western Ghats should be divided into three zones, that is, three ecologically sensitive zones. The zones which have the highest amount of sensitivity, in those zones, no construction activity, no storage activity should be allowed. But the Kasturi Rangan committee actually suggested hydroelectric power plants to be permitted in this area and not completely banning them. These were the main differences between these two committee reports. It is very, very important to read them out because these can be very, very important for your examination point of view. The Gadgil committee was first formed in 2010, while the Kasturi Rangan committee came in much later on, that is in August 2012. The government mainly made the second committee because they were not happy with the provisions of the Gadgil committee report, dividing out different zones and not allowing activities in most of the zones. Gadgil committee in fact even said that no new polluting industries would be permitted in these zones. These are the main articles on the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Equating money laundering with terrorism enhances the scope of misuse of the PMLA law by the authorities. Do you agree? Elaborate. Second, what steps have been taken by the union government to correct the imbalance between direct and indirect taxes in India? Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a very good day ahead.